Hi, I'm Genevieve. Thanks so much for having me here today. I coordinate fundraising for the International Astronomical Union, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about some of the correlations between fundraising and astronomical outreach. We're also going to be talking about the challenges and giving you a couple of tips to consider to really transform your fundraising and attract more money for public engagement activity within astronomy. Hi, I'm Genevieve. Thanks so much. So you're all probably very familiar with the university funding, which comes from governments predominantly and runs into the billions. We're not looking at that form of fundraising here. We're looking at the non-profit sector, and as you can see, there's an awful lot of money involved and an awful lot of opportunity for public engagement to secure some funding. I've given an example of international development aid, also UK and US, where there's really some, one of the most established sectors, particularly the US, which is the market leader. And one of my favourite statistics, which is given the IAU is also a non-profit, that if we were all a combined region, we would have the fifth largest economy in the world. There are a few things to consider as well as you look at this amount of wealth. One of the first things you need to think about is, who do I go to? Within this vast amount of money, what are the key audiences that I should be looking to define? One of the things I often hear a lot in astronomy is people saying, hey, there's companies out there, I should be able to raise money from companies. They're actually not the most generous. Actually, the general public are far and away the most generous. They've given over 400 billion in the US alone in 2019, compared to corporates who gave 21 billion. And within the UK as well, we know that corporate giving is 1 to 2% of that entire 250 billion figure. So bear in mind, as you're sort of thinking about who is my audience, who are my messages, think about where you're going to have the most success. Because really, one of the key questions as I considered some of these points, and given the feedback I've heard from the community, is astronomy outreach really receiving the funding it needs? If not, why not? And what do we need to do to change? So now is a really good point to perhaps consider some of the shared challenges we face in fundraising and public engagement. And I'm borrowing from the very excellent John Begley's research here, where he really stood out to me when he talked about how public engagement is just this sort of standalone goal or objective. It doesn't really look at the wider, bigger picture. Fundraising suffers from exactly the same issue. It's very transactional rather than thinking about it strategically as a sort of a means to an end. It's not sort of a means to an end in itself. It tends to focus very much on short-term objectives, and I do recognise that's quite challenging when you have European Union funding, for example, which is on 3-year cycles. The benefit is for the organisation individual. Is it really about broader society? Quite inward-looking as well. Not necessarily collaborating, which also comes under the competition angle. Who are you working with? Why are you working in isolation? Are there ways we could be combining together? And there seem to be, just thinking again on John's research, some very prioritising of conflicting objectives. Am I here for my donors? Am I here for my institution? Am I here for the government? What is my audience? And there's no real sort of clarity on this quite often. So how do we seek some clarity around this? Well, one of the things you can look at is your organisation's message. So in fundraising, we talk a lot about what we call a minibus analogy, which is used a lot in fundraising training. And why will no one fund my minibus is something that we hear a lot about in the sector. I've replaced minibus for telescope here. It makes it hopefully a little bit more relevant. No one's going to fund our telescope. Why is that? Think about what that telescope actually does. Why do you need it? What problem is it going to address? How is it going to make things improve for the better? Is it about science education, getting more girls into STEM, critical science, developing the critical thinking skills, sort of combating science denial? Are you looking at long-term impact on educational outcomes, employability, reduced polarisation? All these sorts of things really need to be considered when you're looking at sort of what do I need money for. It's all about how you position yourself. So also we talk a lot about impact, which is front and centre of your message. How are you contributing predominantly to the Sustainable Development Goals? And every single country in the world is meant to be addressing the Sustainable Development Goals. So using that as a framework to position your message is very helpful. Also look at the SDG indicators as well. They're available online from the UN. How are you helping countries and donors address these targets that they have to meet? Also look at your relevant national regional frameworks as well. I've listed a few here. Bear in mind that these also ultimately relate back to the Sustainable Development Goals as well, but they do really help give a sort of, I think, a regional or national context to some of the projects you may be developing. And as you can see here is an example from the IAU. This is what we have put on our for our SDGs when we talk to funders, so that they can very clearly see how we're addressing it and how we can help them achieve their own impact. So how do you sort of design this message then? The key tools we use are what we call a case for support and a theory of change, and they're drawn from your strategy and yearly business plan. And you can use these for any fundraising activity, goes from general public and crowdfunding appeals right through to major gift work for 7 figures and above. Your theory of change is what's the problem, what's the solution, and very crucially, how do you fit into delivering that solution? Of course, we can't do everything. So what is that component, what is that part that we can do very well, which helps address the problem and delivers the solution for the SDGs? The case of support is a document, a very important document. You put all of things in here which you can then draw upon for proposals, for short documents to sort of get people interested in your work. It contains a vision, mission, values, case studies, really important, people's lived experiences, real life stories, and also crucial, of course, your budget. Do give some lots of consideration to your finances and financial planning, not just for projects, for your organisations in general. Make sure you're transparent as well. It's very normal to share accounts. It's very normal to share budgets for programmes and budgets for your organisation. Don't also be donor-led. I see this a lot. This is not just something that happens in astronomy, it happens everywhere. Really, you need to have confidence in that you are the experts and you know what you're doing. If a call comes out and it's relevant to your interests, then you should go for it. However, you shouldn't be changing your programs or your projects simply because there's a funding pot out there and you feel the need to bend to that particular donor's wishes. Actually, you'll see an awful lot more success if you develop your theory of change and case for support, and you're very, very clear from the outset, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we achieve it, and this is why we want you to come on board. Critically as well, this is how you also demonstrate to donors how you can help them deliver impact. You can also utilise digital media to show your message, and finally, think about your elevator pitch. You've got 30 seconds to a minute or two to get the importance of what you're talking about across. How do you refine what you're talking about down into a couple of minutes? It is possible. So finally, yes, again, remember you are the experts and you have an awful lot to offer to donors as well. It is not a subordinate relationship. So finally, some key takeaways to leave with you. Firstly, remember that people give to people they like. It's all about personal relationships. It's not a very detailed scientific proposal, and indeed in major gift fundraising we often see it doesn't take much to actually engage someone. They want to know the human story behind what's going on. Also remember to take people on that journey with you as well. The moment you have someone come into contact with your organisation, keep them up to date with your mission and vision. How are you getting on? Have you achieved it? Have you had successes? Have you had challenges? Make sure that you're always involving people with how you are developing and evolving your projects and programs and your organisation as a whole. A very important one in astronomy, I think in particular, just assume people do not know what you are talking about. Why is it so important? Why are the night skies so important? Why is public engagement so important? What does it do? How does astronomy play a role? The amount of times I've spoken to funders who've gone, astronomy? I don't see how that's relevant. So bear in mind people actually don't know why this is important, and make sure you factor that into your all of your communications. So fundraising campaigns as well are also about awareness raising and engagement on key societal issues. So fundraising gives you a real opportunity to put core messages out there. We see this a lot, particularly say in biomedical research, so cancer research, for example. There's a direct correlation between people involved who see something because of a fundraising campaign, relates then back to their further understanding of science. So we do play a key role in public engagement as well, particularly with the general public. And finally, also remember, influencing people, the money will come. And this is really true. This can work at any high value level. This works at any sort of level of the general public. It really works for government as well, which I think is perhaps a really obvious one for public engagement, where if you're imparting the importance of your science and your astronomy, you are going to be able to leverage more funding. So really remember that, you know, this is a real key tool for influence and why fundraising and communications tend to work so closely together. We are intrinsically linked, fundraising and public engagement. This is a fact. And remember, you know, people understand your mission and your goals clearly, then they are far more likely to give you money. So make sure that you are demystifying your message at every step, keeping it short, simple, clear and concise language. Don't use jargon, to make sure that you've got your elevator pitch ready. And when you start doing these things, you start seeing people become a lot more engaged and interested with your work and staying with you in the long term as well. So a one-off donation can turn into a much longer relationship with your organisation. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you all in the Q&A.